Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Wander in Germany podcast. I'm your host, Leanna Brown, from the Germany travel blog, wanderingermany.com. Now, last week, I broke down the steps of how I personally plan itineraries for Germany, and hopefully also set some realistic expectations for balancing Germany's iconic sites with its authentic delights, as we say here at Wander in Germany. So this week, I wanted to give you some specific examples of itineraries that I have created specifically for the Wander in Germany community. Now, each of these itineraries I have personally curated, and since I have been to all of the locations, you know you're getting firsthand knowledge on all the recommendations. And if you know me and my blog articles, you also know that they are going to be extremely detailed. In fact, if you want, you can literally just take the itineraries that I have planned on the blog as is. It is that planned out for you. However, I do also plan them in a unique way that still allows for plenty of individualization as well as flexibility, because I know everybody's trips may look different. For example, while I may say that it's a 7-day itinerary in Germany, you'll actually see as you read through the articles where I give plenty of options to slow down your time and maybe like a particular place, or do day trips from another place to explore even more within Germany. So instead of a 7-day itinerary, we're now looking at 8, 9, 10, however many days you need. And yes, I tell you exactly where I recommend going for all of those day trips or extensions as well. And a lot of my itineraries can also be combined with the other ones that I've created. So, for example, a lot of people choose to combine my Bavaria and Black Forest itineraries together. Now, if you aren't subscribed to my newsletter yet, be sure you head to wanderingermany.com and subscribe to the newsletter from the homepage ASAP, because all of the itineraries that I mentioned today will be sent directly to your inbox in my welcome sequence. And you would not believe the amount of details, insider information, and more that I give you for free in all of those. So if you're still stuck trying to plan for that perfect itinerary, just hang out with me and I've got you covered. After all, I always like to joke that you can plan a trip like a pro with a pro. That's me. When you hang out here at Wander in Germany. So there are 5 of my main Wander in Germany itineraries that I want to cover today. I'll actually put the timestamps for each itinerary in the show notes, so if you want to just skip straight to a particular itinerary that sounds more appealing, feel free to do that too. So today what I want to cover is my 7 to 10-day Germany for first-timers itinerary. Then I want to talk about my 10-day Bavaria itinerary, as well as my alternative to the Romantic Road itinerary, which is also kind of like a Bavarian highlights. And that actually just might be my most proud itinerary that I've curated, especially for the people who want that stereotypical charm of small towns and off the beaten path, while still being really easy to navigate and do, and of course, hitting up some of those most famous bucket list locations in Germany. Now, I do have a Romantic Road itinerary on the blog, but due to time, if you want to check that out, I think I'm just going to leave it there, and you can find it under the itineraries. And while I fully intend on doing numerous in-depth future podcasts on the Black Forest, I do think today I'll also run through my suggestions for itineraries there as well. And then finally, the 5th main topic of itineraries I want to cover today is I want to talk about some itineraries that I'm actually curating for the blog right now for those who only want to travel by public transport and or trains. So that's actually a lot to cover today. So I think how I want to do this is I'm going to just present more of my outlines for you with these itineraries, just to simply to start showing you some of the great routes and how to piece them together that really balance slowing down and appreciating the culture of Germany while still making sure that we're hitting those bucket list experiences and destinations. And of course, I'm always open to suggestions for this podcast. So if there's enough interest in a particular route that you want way more detail on in the podcast itself, I can do that. I can make an entire podcast just on one specific route. Otherwise, you can find every step, every recommendation I give, every little detail to the places that I recommend on these itineraries in the blog. And I do kind of want to preface this and apologize that I know the point of a podcast is that you want to listen to it all instead of reading it. But if I went itinerary by itinerary in the detail that I give on the blog, we would be here all day. Like we would be here all week. So again, if you want one in particular on the podcast, give me a shout in the comments and I can absolutely add another one of those where I go specifically into depth in one of these specific itineraries. All right, so one big caveat before beginning any of these itineraries is that while most of these can be done by trains, and at the very least certain segments can 100% be done by trains, to maximize time and locations, because I know that is a huge factor for most tourists and travelers, these itineraries honestly are just going to be better with a car, at least in some places. And I do tell you when you should use a car versus public transportation in my itineraries. So that's actually my preferred route of doing things is certain days I don't have a car. So for example, if I mention Munich or Berlin, I don't think you should have a car on those days. And I also purposely plan the itineraries so that it should be easy enough that it's sectioned out. So for example, you arrive in Munich where you don't need a car. And then the next few locations, I do recommend a car for. So it's not like you're just wasting money on a car rental sitting in a parking garage in Munich. But the reality is that some of the places I recommend are just easier by car or they're way more efficient. So sure, you can get to almost all these places by train, but it might take way longer, which is fine if you have plenty of time or don't mind multiple transfers and things like that. But again, I'm really trying to balance particularly Americans who usually only have between 7 to 10 to like maybe max 14 days for a trip. So let's get going. I think the first natural itinerary to start with is my Germany for first timers. And I have this blocked out as a 1 week itinerary, but it's really, really easy to extend certain of these days into more days where you can either do day trips from these places or I give suggestions in my itineraries for like, oh, if you've got 2 weeks, add this place in between, like here and here. So this particular itinerary is my best attempt to give you some real, authentic experiences in Germany that will leave you feeling appreciative of the culture and sights, but also allow you to feel productive in your trip. Like you still got a lot in. Now, I will warn you, this is a pretty quick trip that I'm suggesting here. And I think that a bare minimum is 7 days if you really want to explore Germany. And while I think that there is no perfect 1 week itinerary or 2 week itinerary in Germany, I know I'm a little bit biased because it's my own, but I really do think that this is as close to perfect as you might be able to get. All right, so let's go day by day. So with this itinerary, I suggest flying into Munich. And because we want to maximize our time, we are not going to slow down at all. So you are going to hit the ground running. And on day one, you are going to do Munich and Dachau. So when you're in Munich, you're going to hit up some of my favorite spots like the English Gardens, where you can see surfers in the summertime. Actually, even sometimes in the winter too. You can see surfers on the river. Yeah, you might, when I said surfers, you might be like, wait a minute, I thought Munich was like a landlocked city. It is, but there are surfers. And then in the afternoon, you're going to hop an S-Bahn and head to Dachau. And if you're worried about doing that on your own, you can obviously always hire a tour. But in my itinerary, I give you step-by-step directions on how to do this really easily by yourself. Now, day 2 in Munich is all about seeing some of the highlights of the city itself. So you're going to head to the Altstadt. You're going to see the Marienplatz, which is the main Altstadt main town square. You'll see the Glockenspiel, which is like a little show on the clock tower. I also highly recommend doing a walking tour this day. There are free walking tours that are really fantastic, or of course you can book one if you feel more comfortable with that. And I also have suggestions for where to go for local food for this day. Now, it's not my top pick in Munich, but everybody always wants to go to the famous Hofbrauhaus. So of course I have that included in this itinerary for day 2 as well. if you don't want to do the Hofbrauhaus and you'd rather a more local, more authentic beer hall experience, then I recommend heading to the Augustiner Keller. And it is probably one of my favorite beer halls in Germany, let alone in Munich. All right, day 3 is a really fun day for anybody who just loves castles, because today I suggest you taking a day trip down to the famous Cinderella Neuschwanstein Castle. Now, if you have a car, there are other stops that I recommend going on this day, and it's going to be a big, full, long day for you. But I actually recommend like a nearby palace that is on the way called Linderhof. And it makes for a really wonderful day that I think a lot of people, after they go to Neuschwanstein, they say like, oh, it felt very touristy. So I like to balance it with this other palace that if you have a car is really easy to go to. So I recommend going to like Linderhof in the morning and then going to Neuschwanstein in the afternoon. And you can either stay in Füssen, which is the town closest to Neuschwanstein, or if it was easier to do a day trip or you wanted more of a base in Munich, you could head back up to Munich also that evening. So that brings us already almost to the halfway point on this 1-week itinerary, and that brings us to Rothenburg. This is probably one of the most famous medieval towns in all of Germany, and everybody loves going to it. People claim that it's like the Disneyland of Germany, and yes, it is overrun by tourists, but out of all the places that are over touristy, in my opinion, this is still like a must. It is so cute. It's so quaint. And even with all the tourists, I still argue that it is still worth going for first timers because it is the quintessential, half-timbered village, medieval town kind of vibe that we all kind of stereotype in our minds when it comes to Germany. Now, if you want more of an off-the-beaten-path alternative to that, or if you have an extra day available in your itinerary, then I recommend a very unknown hidden gem called Miltenberg, and you can add that right into your itinerary or do instead of Rothenburg, which still is going to give you that very fairy tale-esque vibe of a little village. So on day 5, we're going to leave Bavaria and we're going to head over to another part of southern Germany, which is the Rhine and Moselle Valley area of Germany that so many people really love to go to. So today on day 5, we're going to head to Rüdesheim am Rhein. Now, again, this is where I'm going to kind of skip ahead because there's so many details on this day that I give in my itinerary, such as extra places to stop at, viewpoints to go to, and things like that. But honestly, just know that in the itinerary that I have on the blog, I walk you through this day step by step. So day 6, we're almost towards the end of our, 1 week for first timers in Germany. And I recommend going on a Rhine River cruise. Now, the reason why I recommend doing this is it's a local ferry. It's nothing fancy. It's not like this super, multi-day cruise ship. You literally hop on this local ferry and you can use it as a hop on, hop off type of transportation. While you're on the ferry, you can order wine and you literally float by castle after castle after castle on the Rhine River. You can stop off in these super enchanting villages and towns. You can walk through vineyards. It's just like this really amazing, wonderful day. And it's a great juxtaposition to like the beer culture in Germany, which is more of the wine culture here over in the Rhine River area. Now, to really maximize your time, it may not maximize your budget, but I recommend, since you're so close, flying out of Frankfurt with this itinerary. Yes, you can head back to Munich, but it does add quite a bit of time to your itinerary. Now, as you can tell, we didn't even mention places like the Black Forest. We didn't even mention Berlin. And that's not because I don't think those should be in a first timer's itinerary. I do. But if you only have 7 days, I think it's really important for you to see Bavaria. I mean, I'm biased. I live in Bavaria and I love Bavaria, but I think that's where most tourists have their stereotypes of the beer halls, of the pretzels. Yes, some people even wear lederhosen and things like that. And I think that is just a good place for first timers to experience. And while Berlin is absolutely a great place for first timers, logistically, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to add in on such a short itinerary. And likewise, the Black Forest is amazing. And I really think you should add that on if you have extra days to this itinerary. However, if you only have 1 week, the things that you probably want to see in the Black Forest, again, half-timbered houses, charming villages, things like that, I give you in some of these other places that I've recommended on the way. So that's why I say it's not a perfect itinerary, but I do as best as I can with the limited time that we have. I also like to look at this particular itinerary as a framework and structure and skeleton plan for you. And it is planned out exactly, detail by detail, like literally do this in the morning, do this in the afternoon, do this in the evening, if you so choose. And I know some people don't need that also, but if you do want or need that, I have it literally laid out. But also it allows for flexibility. Like I mentioned before, if you don't want to do the Rhine River, then take those, 2 days off the itinerary and instead do the Black Forest. So it still allows for the flexibility that if you need or want to do something else, you absolutely still easily can. And it will still make sense with the flow of that itinerary. All right, so the next itinerary that I want to highlight is my 10 days in Bavaria. Now, again, I know that this is not ideal for people who want to see as much of Germany as possible, but if you're the kind of person that wants to slow down and really experience each place, but still get a lot in and maybe feel like you're seeing some of those stereotypical things that we all think of Germany, then 10 days in Bavaria is amazing. Again, I'm probably biased because I live in Bavaria and I love living in this region. But it really is a lot of those check marks off of your bucket list when you think of Germany. All right, so let's dive in. Sometimes a lot of my day-to-day stuff is a little bit repeated from other itineraries. So, a day in Munich can be a day in Munich. So, for example, you're going to fly into Munich with this 10-day Bavaria itinerary. And just like last time, you are going to hit the ground running. Now, in the Germany for first timers 7-day itinerary that I just talked about, I have you go to the English Gardens first, but on this itinerary, I have a full Munich itinerary for you. So you're going to be hitting up all the highlights, the Altstadt, the Glockenspiel, like I mentioned earlier, the Hofbrauhaus, pretty much any of those like Munich must-sees, you're going to try to cram in on this day one. And, you can slow down and take as much of it out as you want as well, especially considering jet lag. Now for day 2, you're going to stay in Munich as a home base, but just like in the other itinerary, I'm going to give you step-by-step directions on how to get to Dachau, one of the most famous concentration camps in Germany. I do think this is a really sobering day and a very important day that, despite how fast of a trip you're on, I think this is really essential to visit. Now, I don't think you need all day for Dachau, so of course I have suggestions on how to fill the rest of your day in Munich. Now, day 3 is where I suggest renting a car because I want you to head down to one of my favorite places in Germany, and it is the Bavarian Alps. And while you absolutely can get there by car, some of the places after this are really hard by public transportation. So having a car at this point is easiest to get in Munich. So once you have that car, you're going to head down to Garmisch-Partenkirchen, which is probably one of the most famous towns in the Bavarian Alps. And on this day, I recommend either going to the Zugspitze, which is the tallest mountain in Germany if you are a bucket list person, or if you like to do a little bit more budget travel or are fine having amazing experiences without maybe needing that bucket list, is to do the literal neighbor to Zugspitze, which is the Alpspitze, and is, in my opinion, equally as amazing to go up to. You take a gondola. Either way, you just feel like you're on top of the world, if not at least top of Germany, on top of the mountains. It's just gorgeous. On that same day, we are packing it in here, folks. I recommend this is especially good if you're here in the summertime because the days are super long. Winter is a little bit harder because the days are much shorter. But if you're here in the summer, you can pack all of this in. I've done all of this myself, so I guarantee you can do all this also. So in the afternoon, you come down from the Zugspitze and you're basically at the foot of the Zugspitze now, and there is the gorgeous Lake Eibsee, which is just one of the most beautiful alpine lakes in Bavaria. Now, in an ideal world, you would be staying longer in Garmisch or the nearby villages. But on, again, a pretty whirlwind trip of 10 days in Bavaria, we got to keep things moving. So on day 4, we're going to do that same Linderhof and Neuschwanstein that I talked to you about from the 1-week itinerary. And if you're like really bold and really want to cram even more in, you could add Oberammergau to this day as well. I don't super recommend it, but again, I get that some people are, willing to just pack in as much as possible, and that would be the day to add that town in. Now, what I didn't mention was that while you're going to head to Neuschwanstein, you're still going to keep your base at Garmisch. So on day 5, you're going to come back and we're going to explore a little bit more of Garmisch itself, as well as do the Partnach Klamm, which is the Partnach Gorge, and is just really, not to be like punny, but is really gorgeous. Now, again, if you have extra days, going to nearby like Mittenwald, which is just the next town over, and the Mittenwald Gorge is also an amazing experience. But if you are limited on time, just having at least these 2 days for the Zugspitze and the gorge and the town itself is a good, really quick introduction to Garmisch. Now on day 6, we're going to head back to Rothenburg. Again, you can probably see the theme of some of these itineraries. These are some of the places. If I've mentioned them in numerous itineraries, it's because they're some of the most famous. And again, I want to reiterate that just because they are the most famous doesn't mean that you should skip them because you might feel like they're touristy. Like, I would argue that Neuschwanstein is one of the most touristy things in Germany. But again, like, how can you go to Bavaria and not do Neuschwanstein? It's gorgeous. So same thing with Rothenburg. We're going to keep that on this particular itinerary. Now from Rothenburg, you're going to loop up and you are going to go to Nuremberg next. Now, if you needed to scrap a day anywhere, I guess you could do Nuremberg in one day. But I do recommend having 2 days for Nuremberg because you want one day where you get to really explore the Altstadt and the town and the city itself. But the next day is where they have the Nazi rally grounds. And this is a really amazing place for history. And even if you're not a history lover, one of the most amazing museums I've ever been to in Germany is the Documentation Centrum in Nuremberg. And the reason why this is such a powerful place for me is because for so much of my life, I would always say, like, I don't understand how Hitler was able to take over and convince an entire country of this ideology. And this museum is one of the best places that explains how this brainwashing, for lack of better words, really was able to take hold. I mean, because that's the thing, like, it wasn't brainwashing. Like, he was saying things that made a lot of sense to a lot of people at the time, sadly. So if you've ever wondered how the atrocities were able to actually like fully formulate here, this is an amazing place to go. It's a very, again, sombering. It's a hard day to take in if you get emotional about these kinds of things. So, but it is a great place to go to for history. The whole Nazi rally grounds is a really well done, respectful area that is, I think, a very important part of history, both worldwide as well as in Germany. All right, so moving on, for day 9, it's one of my favorite places that a lot of people don't know about going to. I would not call it a hidden gem because a lot of people know about it, but so many people skip it, and that is Bamberg. I don't care how you pronounce it. It's an amazing place to go to. I love going there. It is so cute. It is so quaint. It's just this really great vibe. And you, again, could spend several days there, but on this particular itinerary, we're going to spend 1 day before heading to Regensburg on day 10. And again, I'm sorry, I'm biased. I live in Regensburg, so of course I have to put it on my Bavarian itinerary, but it's just a really fantastic medieval city, especially in the spring and summer and fall times when there are beer gardens everywhere. There's a great cafe culture. And, you don't need more than a day. Of course, I live here. Of course, I think you could spend more than a day in Regensburg. But it is a great place to stop at and is a great, alternative, like not alternative in the sense of like do this instead of, but, to contrast a city like Munich to a city like Regensburg. They have different vibes, different feels. And I think both of them are equally as important to experience when in Germany, and in this particular case, in Bavaria. And from there, you're going to head right back down to Munich. So, I know you don't see a map right now, but if you were to look at a map, this basically creates a loop for you. So it's very easy to navigate, very easy to do. You're not doing a whole lot of backtracking. And it's just a really great itinerary to really experience some of the Bavarian local culture. All right, so the next itinerary that I am so proud of, and I've coined my own Under the Radar route by Wander in Germany, is, again, really focusing on Bavaria, but this is my alternative to the Romantic Road. So if you don't know yet, the Romantic Road is a very popular but very touristy, kind of like prefabricated, quote unquote, route that goes through, quote unquote, romantic towns. And I don't want to get into it here because it's a whole other conversation, and we'll do a whole podcast on the Romantic Road another day. But what it boils down to is, because it's called the Romantic Road, so many people have, I think, a very false vision of what to expect from this route, from these towns, from these villages. And plenty of people go on this route, and plenty of people are very happy with it, and plenty of people enjoy it. But, I am such a sucker for really wanting to provide hidden gems to you guys, really showing authentic experiences. I mean, shoot, that's like my tagline, right? I say we balance Germany's iconic sites with authentic delights. And I think that's why I'm most proud of this itinerary that I created for you guys, because to me, it combines a lot of what people want in this fairy tale Romantic Road itinerary, but is perfect also for people who want an off the beaten path itinerary, or maybe they've done Germany before and want something a little bit more local, a little bit more insider. And that's why I think this itinerary is just amazing. So the first place that we're going to stop at in this itinerary is, I do recommend maybe starting in Munich, possibly even Frankfurt, depending on what you're willing to do. But the first day is you're going to start in Bayreuth. Now, this is a town that aren't on many people's radars, but it's a really great place for a one-day stop. It's got this Baroque, beautiful feel to the town, and it's a great cultural hub. Now, day 2, I've already talked about how much I love Bamberg and just am kind of like obsessed with it currently. So, of course, I've got to have time for that little medieval town. I mean, the thing is, most people, so the biggest highlights to the Romantic Road is Rothenburg and Neuschwanstein. And I feel like so many times if you compared Rothenburg to Bamberg, like side by side, they have so much of the same things, except Bamberg is way less overrun with tourists. So that's why I love the town. And it's just a great place. It even has a Nightman's Watch tour, which is one of the things people love about Rothenburg. The other thing that it has that Rothenburg doesn't is its Rauchbier, which is smoked beer. And it's famous just in Bamberg. You'll either love it or you hate it, but you've got to try it. Now, for day 3, we're really getting off the beaten path, and we are going to a little place that is called Franconia, Switzerland. And this is a place that you aren't going to find in hardly any guidebooks and many other itineraries. And we're going to head to a little village of Pottenstein. Now, I love throwing this location in for several reasons. First is it really kind of breaks up the sightseeing of villages and towns, and it takes you into a gorgeous area of Germany that many people skip, with beautiful rock formations that makes you feel like you're almost in the mountains. You're just like in a completely different atmosphere almost. But also it breaks up the sightseeing because in Pottenstein, it's a lot more outdoor activities. So you can go hiking in a cave. There's a really cool Klettersteig, which is a climbing ropes course in the forest. There's a Rodobahn, which is kind of like an alpine coaster. It's just a really great place to stop. And you're really surrounded by locals because not a lot of tourists go into this area of Germany at all. Now on day 4, we're going to go over to Nuremberg, and I've already mentioned in the other itineraries, what I think you should and should not do while you're in Nuremberg. So we'll skip that for now to keep things rolling. And on day 5 is another one of my, really hidden gem moments. So on day 5, I recommend going to, I'm going to say these and people are going to be like, what are you talking about? So from Nuremberg in the car, you're going to stop in a little town called Neumarkt, and you're going to go to the Wolfstein Castle. And I only add this in here because, again, it's super off the beaten path, but yet like directly on your route of driving. So when I say off the beaten path, I don't mean it's hard for you to go to. Like you're literally going to be on this Autobahn and you're just going to hop off it and you're going to go to this castle that, again, like no tourists know about. And it's a gorgeous castle and you overlook this area of Bavaria that is rolling hills and just beautiful. And if you really want to get off the beaten path, then after you do this castle, you're going to head to this little teeny tiny village. And again, I'm biased. This is the village that I first lived in when we first moved to Germany, and it's Parsberg. And there's really nothing super spectacular about this village. I know I'm not selling it, but just hear me out. The reason why I say add this into your day is because it is, again, a very small local village. There's a gorgeous castle that you can walk up to at the top. And one of the best schnitzels that I have ever had in my entire life is at one of these small, locally run restaurants. So if you really want to feel like you're really getting into local culture, like this is the day for you. On this day, I also recommend another town, so you can kind of choose between these, and it's Kalmunz. And it is just this gorgeous medieval town. It's located on a river. You know, if you've heard me talk about Regensburg before, some people call it like the mini Regensburg because they're both with like pastel buildings right along a river, super cute, super quaint. And again, like just not a lot of tourists. It's got a gorgeous ruined castle at the top of a cliff. And it's just a really great place to feel like you're off the beaten path. Speaking of Regensburg, that's going to be day 6. And of course, I give you exactly what to do. I mean, I live in Regensburg, so of course I have the insider tips there. And on day 7 from Regensburg, you're going to do a day trip to the Weltenburg Cloister, which is, again, I'm biased because I live in Regensburg, but this is one of my favorite monastic breweries that I've ever been to. And it's because it's a whole thing. So the way that I recommend going to it is you actually get on a ferry boat near Regensburg and you take the ferry down the Donau, the Danube, to the cloister. And this monastic brewery, like they have won beer awards time after time on like the best beers. And it's just this really great vibe. Now, I will say a lot of tourists from Danube cruises do take day trips here. So this is not necessarily an off the beaten path, but I will say it is definitely not the most common thing to do. So you'll kind of get this weird mixture of both locals like playing in the river, skipping rocks, taking canoe rides, as well as tourists, mostly from those river cruises. Now, this itinerary, we're going to wrap up with days 8, 9, and 10. In that Munich, Dachau, and Neuschwanstein combo that I've talked about in the other itineraries. So basically, the reason why I love this itinerary, what I like to call my under the radar route, or even my alternative to the romantic road, is because I believe it checks off all the things that you want from the romantic road. It checks off all those quaint villages. It checks off the off the beaten path that you like think you're going to get with the romantic road, but you're really not. It also checks off the bucket list places. It checks off things like Neuschwanstein and Munich. So you don't feel like you're necessarily missing anything either. I will say you are missing Rothenburg. And if you are bold or you have more time, like add that to the itinerary as well. Like absolutely. But if you want something alternative, if you want something a little bit more off the beaten path, yet still charming, super easy to navigate, then this is the itinerary for you. All right, so I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about Black Forest itineraries right now because this is already getting really long and because I have it super detailed on the blog. But one of the big reasons why I don't want to detail it here is because the way I've created my Black Forest itineraries on the blog is it's kind of like a choose your own adventure style. And so it's very dependent on you as a traveler and your travel styles. So for example, what I did with my Black Forest itineraries is I've broken it up into different sections of the Black Forest. So I kind of have it like north, central, south, and east Black Forest. And the reality is when you look at these itineraries, and each one I created to be about 3 to 4 days long each. And the reason why I did this is because when you actually look at what the Black Forest has to offer, a lot of the things that you probably want out of it, you might be able to check off in other places. Like, again, those, cute, quintessential little villages with half timbered buildings, forests, even like you can obviously get in other places in Bavaria and things like that. So logistically wise, it doesn't always make the most sense for tourists to go down to the Black Forest. It just is harder to navigate when you have to add numerous hours just to get into that region. Now, that's not to say that I don't think it's worth visiting. I love the Black Forest. It's gorgeous and it's beautiful. However, for people on tight time schedules, it doesn't always make the most sense. So what I did was I kind of broke it into 3 to 4 day options, and you can literally put all of these options together and you've basically got a week in the Black Forest, or you can do like one of these sections as an add-on to any of my other itineraries so that you just really hit up the places or the things that you most want out of the Black Forest. So like, for example, let's say you really want to do the Triberg waterfalls and you want to see the cuckoo clocks. Then I have that as a 3-day itinerary that you can add on to, let's say, the Germany for first timers, and you only add on 3 days. But let's say you want another few days, like, don't worry, I got you there too. I also broke up the Black Forest into kind of themes. So like, I think that certain areas of the Black Forest really cater to, outdoor enthusiasts, where other parts really cater to the German spawn culture phenomenon. So, really depending on what you like to do, what I kind of did with these different itineraries was I found about 4 different home bases, and each of these home bases then have 3 to 4 day trips from that home base. And again, like, you can very easily connect these to then create an even longer Black Forest itinerary. And don't worry, I hit up all the main places in the Black Forest with these itineraries. So I've got Baden-Baden, which is the most famous German spa town. I've got Freiburg, which is another really great medieval city. I've got Triberg, which is where the waterfalls are and the cuckoo clocks are. So, I hit up all the major ones in case you want those. And of course, like, getting from one to the other, I've included all the little secret gems and favorite places that are a little bit more off the beaten path. Now, the last set of itinerary that I want to cover is solely based on trains. Now, again, you can kind of see that I think that if you want to really maximize your time, that you probably need a car when you come to Germany. And I mean, I've left out so many amazing places on the itineraries that I've mentioned. Like, I haven't even mentioned Berlin in any of these itineraries. I haven't even mentioned Hamburg or anything like that. So obviously, like, the itineraries that I have listed here are not the end all be all. But I do think that these itineraries that I've listed are really good places to start, especially for first timers or especially for people who maybe want more off the beaten path. But I also created those itineraries mostly because they make a lot of sense logistically with where they're located at in the country. However, if you want to do a train itinerary, I think that that's a really great option. Now, the thing about a train itinerary in Germany is I think you actually need to plan on extra and more days than what you would if you had a car, simply because the days that you need to travel are going to probably take you longer to get from one place to the next. The other thing to know is that while you can absolutely go to off the beaten path locations, hidden gems, things like that by train, most of what I would recommend in a whirlwind Germany itinerary by rail type of itinerary would kind of just be the main highlights. So this is great for people who want to see like the main sites, more of like cities, rather than maybe the smaller local towns and villages. So let's say you've got 2 weeks and you want to see Germany by rail. I probably wouldn't do this in any less time. I mean, you probably could, but again, I like to slow down at least a little. So what I recommend for this itinerary is basically you're going to do all the main major train hubs. So for example, you can fly into Munich, do Munich, and then take an ICE train, so like the high-speed trains, straight over to Frankfurt. From Frankfurt, you can hop up to Cologne. And, what I'm leaving out here right now in this very quick itinerary explanation to you is, between Frankfurt and Cologne, Go and take a Rhine River cruise. You can even take from Frankfurt. You could take a whole Rhine River cruise, a day cruise, from Frankfurt all the way up to Koblenz, and then even all the way up to Cologne. So like you have all of these other experiences, like besides just these main cities. So that is another option is, in between these places, is there anywhere you want to stop and anywhere you want to explore? Just know that you definitely need to plan that time into the itinerary, obviously. So then, for example, from Cologne, you can hop over to Hamburg. And then from Hamburg, you can hop over to Berlin. And then from Berlin, you have a few choices. Like you can go over to Dresden really easily. But if you want an even more easy and direct route, you can go down to Leipzig. From Leipzig, it's a short train ride down to Nuremberg. From Nuremberg, it's another short train ride down to Munich. And bam, you've got yourself a circular route. Now, the other thing about this particular train itinerary is that I've eliminated a lot of routes that have multiple transfers or take too long in between. So, of course, you could go to other places, or of course, you could choose other options. But especially for people who aren't familiar with German trains or are afraid of what they're hearing about Deutsche Bahn getting worse and worse with train schedules, which is not a lie, then, eliminating some of those variables can make for a much more enjoyable trip when, you're not missing on trains or, trains aren't being completely delayed or even worse, God forbid, canceled. When you eliminate some of those variables, it just makes it for an easier trip. So, again, there's nothing to say that you shouldn't stop at places in between these routes. But if you want like a really simple route, yet where you're still seeing so many of the main cities of Germany, that's a really good option is to do that circular route. All right, so I feel like I threw a ton of information at you, and if not a ton of information, at least a lot of different itineraries. And I know probably listening to all of this feels overwhelming because it's hard to map it all out in your mind. So again, I'm sorry that I know this is a podcast, so I know like you're in auditory listening mode, but I promise if you go to wanderingermany.com and you see these routes and I have it mapped out and you see how they lay out, it's all going to come together much, much more naturally and you're going to understand it way, way easier. And of course, if you just want me to send these straight to your inbox, you can head to wanderingermany.com. And like I said, subscribe to my email newsletter. And in the welcome sequence, I actually give you all of my itineraries. And like I said, I know I flew through these here, but in the itineraries themselves, I am so detailed. Like I tell you where I recommend eating. I tell you what parts of town, if I have a recommendation, where to stay at and things like that. So if you feel like you need help planning an itinerary, I know this might have felt kind of glossed over because I really wanted to get this information to you because I know how overwhelming it can feel to have to plan your own itinerary. So I wanted just to give you the outline and the skeleton of it today so that you could see kind of, where the routes line up. And then if it's something that sounds interesting to you, that you can go to the website and check it all out for yourself. And like I said earlier, if there's one of these itineraries that you want me to dig deeper into on the podcast, I'm happy to do that. And I'm also happy to pull in guests that are locals to really flesh out each of those itineraries for you. So of course, just let me know in the comments and I'll put that on the itinerary. Well, my podcast itinerary. And of course, once you have your itinerary planned, you can start booking accommodation. And that's where we're going to start next week. I have kind of like a little mini series of planning accommodations in Germany. And so, of course, if you want to get all of that information, make sure you're subscribed so you get those notifications for when those podcasts come out in the next 3 weeks. So until next time, bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.